Okay, this lecture, the ninth lecture, was given on March 2nd, 1924, and I think it's one of the best in the book so far. It's the last of his sort of preparatory lectures before he starts getting into the past lives of famous European individuals like Franz Schubert and Darwin and Marx and Engels and so forth. Here he gets into his basic epistemology and his threefold model of the human being, which he breaks down into the head, the torso, and the limbs. Those are the three aspects. And the head has to do with thinking, and the heart, the rhythmic system of the torso, has to do with feeling, and the limbs, the motor system, of course, have to do with willing, carrying out one's will. But the key now to this model is that he starts with this embryogenetic idea that the head is the seed of the human organism in the embryo. The head is the first thing that develops. It's almost all head at first. That's the first thing that develops. And then the rhythmic system of the torso, which consists, of course, of the beating of the heart, breathing, and digestion, develops. The heart, I don't think, starts beating until like the third week. And some mediums have said that once the heart starts beating, that's when the soul actually enters into the fetus. I'm not sure Steiner agrees with that or not. We'll find out. And then the limbs then are the last thing, the motor system to develop that carries out the will. So we have thinking with the head, feeling with the heart, and the carrying out of the will with the limbs, which are all appendages. And that also includes the penis and the clitoris, which are also appendages, and they're also linked with the will. And then here's the fully developed fetus. So we see how the whole thing here has developed. But the head is in a way, the head is, I think he says elsewhere, is a kind of primitive exoskeleton, but it is the seed from which the human being develops. And here's a model where he breaks it down. And what he's going to do is, I think is quite brilliant, is that he synthesizes St. Dionysius's model of the celestial hierarchies from the 9th century, along with Indian philosophy, the Om, which is broken down into, it can either be spelled O-M or A-U-M, but when it's spelled A-U-M, it has to do with waking, dreaming, and deep dreamless sleep. And so here he links them all together. With the head, we have the senses and the nerves. For now, ignore the planets. They're not part of this lecture. But the head is important it contains the whole sensory system and the nerves. And those senses, of course, extend all through the body and the nerves. So in a way that the head permeates the entire body, but in a way it's also a very separate thing. It has to do with thinking. So the torso then has to do with the autonomic systems of breathing and the beating of the heart, the circulation of the blood, and the breathing. And just as a side note, this would be the difference in Oswald Spengler between what he calls Wachsein and Dasein. Wachsein for him is waking consciousness, and Dasein is pulse, beat, rhythm, as he calls it, the involuntary instinctive systems that don't involve the use of the conscious will. And Steiner criticizes him for being simplistic with just a dualistic model. For Steiner, everything comes in either threes or sevens. And breathing and circulation, this all has to do with feeling. If we think of the Heart Chakra in the Indian system, or just think of the metaphor of the human heart. Well, he's got a bad heart. Oh, my heart is broken. When we think of feelings, we do think of the heart. And then the limbs have to do with metabolism, movement, and also reproduction, since the genitals are also appendages. And all that has to do with willing. The limbs carry out the will. The hand carries the sword. The finger pulls the trigger. and then the genitals reproduce. So all of that has to do sort of with the lower functions of willing. So we have head, rhythmic, and limbs, and then we have thinking, feeling, and willing. And he's also going to link this with the Hindu Om, A-U-M, as waking consciousness, dreaming consciousness. He says our dreams are pictures of our feelings. He doesn't say they're pictures of our ideas, or repressed ideas, the way Freud and Jung do. He says they're pictures of our feelings, and then deep dreamless sleep he links to willing. So that's that model there. Now it's interesting to compare here his model of, in his medical theory, that the human being is an upside down plant, basically. The head corresponds to the roots. As we saw in the embryogenetic model, the head was the seed from out of which the rest of the organism developed. And here we have the roots, and we have root food like potatoes and carrots and beets. And root food is good for the head. Think of carrots as being good for your eyes. These are just, if there are head problems, Steiner says that these foods should be drawn from, the root foods. Whereas the stem and the leaves corresponds to the torso, the rhythmic systems. If there are problems with a person's heart, he should be given a medication that is connected with plants like chamomile and so forth. It's been a long time since I've read his medical model, but we'll talk about it at some point. And then, of course, the genitals correspond to the flowers for obvious reasons. And the corolla has within it its own sex organs, the pistil and the stamens. So the human being develops from the head, just like a plant, puts down its roots first, then grows up. And so, in a way, the human being is a kind of upside down plant. He doesn't mention that in this lecture, but I think it's important to understand that it is part of his model. Now he starts talking about ideas, and he says that impressions are taken into the white matter of the brain, whereas ideas are formed out of the gray matter. And he says that the white matter is older and more evolved, and you can see that the gray matter has developed around it because it is evolutionarily not as late as the white matter. And so the white matter of the brain takes in the impressions, and the gray matter of the brain is the source of our ideas when we come up with ideas. And this is important because he says that the head is broken down into two aspects, whereas the other two are not. And let's see. So then he connects all of this to his model of the angelic hierarchies, which he has, of course, taken from Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite from his celestial hierarchies of, I believe, about 900. It's been a long time since I've read that. And fusing that together with German epistemology and with Hindu philosophy. So brilliantly, I think, he's synthesizing these ideas from three different traditions, one of which is medieval, one is sort of modern German, and the other is very, very ancient. The Hindu theory of Om as waking, dreaming, and sleeping is quite old. It goes back to the Upanishads, which are about the time, written about the same time as Homer, 800 BC. And so here he's got the third hierarchy, which is the closest one to man, that has to do with archai, angels, and archangels, and they are linked with the head organization and the forming of ideas. I suppose these are the beings who give us inspiration, the forming of ideas, and perceiving. We saw the difference between the white matter and the gray matter, with the gray matter as the source of ideas and the white matter with perceiving. And all of that has to do with waking consciousness, which is always trying to catch, which is always oriented to the past in the Hindu model. This is where causality works. Everything is illuminated externally by either the sun or fire. That's the Hindu commentary on waking. So then the second hierarchy has to do with our rhythmic system, which has to do with feeling, as we have seen, and also dreaming. So that hierarchy is connected specifically with our dreaming, whereas the angels, the lowest hierarchy to man, has to do with the formation of waking and the forming of our ideas. We do not form our ideas alone. They come in through inspiration. He also has a threefold model of imagination, inspiration, and intuition, which are the three highest faculties in man. And imagination has to do with perceiving in terms of visions and symbols. It's basically the Jungian collective unconscious for him, imagination. And the whole point of it is that it divorces the mind from relying on the senses. You form symbolic and mythological images in your mind with imagination, whereas inspiration has to do then, of course, with spirits and angels and the higher beings perceiving the interrelationships between them and receiving inspiration from them, from new ideas, a lot of which comes in through our dreams. And then the highest hierarchy, or the highest faculty in man, is intuition, which has to do with actually sort of getting into the actuality of the beings on the other side and being able to see their past lives, being able to read the Akashic record and see their past lives. So that's the highest faculty. So in a way, these three faculties of perceiving and forming ideas on the one hand, feeling and willing, are linked with those three other faculties, although those are upper faculties, and these are not necessarily upper, especially this next one, willing. And the first hierarchy, which is actually the highest, the cherubim, seraphim, and the thrones, spirits of love and harmony, they are linked with our motor organization, our will. The will, remember, is connected with our limbs and our genitals, and those are the things that carry out deeds, sex on the one hand or murder on the other. The hand is what carries the sword. And so it's linked with what Schopenhauer would call the will, which is blind and irrational, hence the connection with deep dreamless sleep in the Hindu tradition. But those are the deeds that will determine the karma for our next life. And so when we're planning our next life, between death and a new birth, these beings are the ones from the highest hierarchy, seraphim, cherubim, and thrones, who are helping us to plan out our next life and to make our contracts and work out our destiny for what will happen to us as a result of these deeds. But it's all done with the free participation on the part of the individual. The contracts that we make are agreed to. They're not forced on us. Nothing is forced on us. It's the soul needs to learn certain lessons, and it needs to go through certain kinds of karma to get to those lessons that it needs for itself. All right, so we'll leave that lecture there, and that's the last of his preparatory lectures. In the next lecture, he begins to look at the past lives of famous European individuals like Franz Schubert. So we'll talk about that next.